Okay, and I'd like to welcome you all to number 135 of the Circle of Wine Writers Let's Talk series. Today's topic is the Wines of Provence, a conversation with Liz Gabay, Master of Wine, and Ben Bernheim. Welcome to those joining for the first time. I don't think there is anybody joining for the first time, but those of you who are not aware and not members, please note that you can go to our Circle website to find all the details about the Circle and about how to join online. We're now 50-50 UK and overseas, so very much an international organisation, but we were founded in 1960 in the UK, so we really have grown and developed as the years have gone on. We're all comprising of wine writers, educators, broadcasters, and other professional communicators. As I said, there's more information on the Circle website, but I'd now like to hand over to Helen Savage, who's been organising this session, who will chat to you and present and talk to our presenters today. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you, Andrea, ever so much. I'm really thrilled about today, despite the fact that we're beating records for heat everywhere. It just seems the thing to talk about rosé, really. We are going to do two things. We're going to look a little bit at Liz and Ben's earlier book, The Rosés of Southern France, as well as the new book about Provence. Yeah, we are. So it's got a double bit to it. Liz, as Andrea has said, is a master of wine. She has been since 1998. In fact, is celebrating 40 years of writing about rosé. And she does many other things too, of course, including helping to make wine in Slovenia and generally Slovakia, keeping the profile of rosé around the world up in a way that is quite remarkable. And Ben, you realise, is related to Liz, mother and son, and I've just been discovering full of all sorts of gems of information about this world. So we're in very safe hands tonight, indeed. Also, I think it's quite interesting that on Friday we shall be celebrating World Rosé Day. So there is another timely dimension to what we're going to be talking about today. I'm very aware, Liz and Ben, that you produced the rosés of southern France 4 years ago, but just 4 years before that, Liz, you wrote a very, very wonderful book about rosé worldwide. It's very clear that from the evolution of that book to the rosé book to the Provençal book now, that rosé is a very quickly changing category. It's quite an extraordinary phenomenon, how fast it seems to be changing. How do you think rosé from the south of France will change over the next 10 years?
I think actually it's quite interesting in that, like when we work with any subject, there are times when it seems to be progressing very, very slowly because we have to wait for every vintage to see the changes. And it's only retrospectively that sometimes we look and say, oh, that is now completely different. So the first book, which came out in January 2018, coincidentally on the same day that Valérie Roussel launched the Rosé Day that's coming up this Friday, it was a totally different world. I mean, it really was. Provence Rosé was very much the market leader with a lot of idiosyncratic wines from around the world. And in the past 10 years, almost 10 years now, that world has completely changed. And I have to say, I do feel embarrassed when people still buy Rosé Understanding the Pink Wine Revolution, because I have to sort of preamble and I say, it's a historic document now. This is what the world was like then. It is not what the world of rosé is like now.
If I can just butt in on the history component, a book isn't written in a day, and I think even if it was published in January 2018, I remember a lot of the wines that were tasted for it were maybe 2014 or even 2015, maybe, and so the book was written in sort of 17, and so even if it has only been 8 years, it's writing about a snapshot from 12 years ago. And I think that has changed so unbelievably radically. It's not even it's not the same world, not the same category. Nothing is shared. I'm not sure.
I think also it's quite interesting in that, I mean, Elisabetta and I met 2018 at a rosé festival on Lake Garda, as one does, and I remember the two of us going round trying to find rosés which they were all drinkable, but trying to just establish they were rosés from all over Italy, and just trying to understand them. And I think between us, we've seen Southern Tuscan rosés develop leaps and bounds. So yes, I do think so. That book, everything changed, and then there was a lot of work, and then COVID came, and then Ben and I were stuck at home. Ben came home during COVID, and Ben had this bright idea. There are no wine fairs going on. Let's ask for samples. People can send us the rosé, and we'll taste it, and we'll write up a rosé report. And so throughout COVID, we had pallets of rosé arriving. I mean, it was we supplied the entire village with rosé throughout COVID. And
just phenomenal. We tasted some wonderful wines. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear
yes,
me?
just the first few words.
Yes.
During that first report, we tasted just over 1,000 wines, and there were some really phenomenal wines that we discovered in the south of France, and this was a precursor to the Rosés of Southern France book. But you asked, your first question was, where do we see rosé going in the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Back in even 2021 or 2020 to 2022, we tasted a lot of great rosé. We tasted also a lot of really abysmal rosé, and I think we sometimes mix our words when talking about the how bright the future of the category is, but it really is important to clarify that even just 3 or 4 years ago there was a lot of awful rosé being made that isn't so common nowadays. And we can talk a lot about rosé has gone from whatever percent of consumption to another, give or take, rough now 10%. But I think that hides the fact that it used to be that you couldn't go into a supermarket and reliably buy something you'd want to at least consider drinking. And now everything's okay. It's really a fantastic place to be in, sort of having experienced the category over the last few years.
Yeah,
given also that change. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, when we tasted the over 1,000 rosés and we were editing it at the end, and I think we had about 50% of the rosés with an identical tasting note. And you kind of think there was an awful lot of rosé being made. We had a lot of peachy fruit, a lot of peachy fruit. It was the in flavour that year. And it's the price you're going to buy on the price at that point. It's making it. Yeah, so where it'll go now, I think it's interesting to think of what fruit. So we've had the grapefruit flavoured rosé, the peach, the strawberry, the white peach, yellow peach, slightly saline, slightly mineral. I'm not quite sure. At the moment, I would say, with the desire for lower alcohols, an awful lot of unripe rosé coming out, which is pretty grim. The amount of fruit flavour, I would say, is 90% the cultured yeast being used. I think if you look through, if you're bored and you're someone like Ben, you can read through catalogues of yeast producers to see the flavours.
I think it depends also on which specific flavours we're looking at. So grapefruit is 90% yeast, and strawberries are very yeasty, but strawberries can be Grenache. But then also, or more veg. I think also it's important to understand that it's not just a one-dimensional yeast X gives this. It's a certain yeast at a certain temperature, for example. So a lot of the grapefruity yeasts will be grapefruity if they're fermented at, say, 16 to 18, but those exact same yeasts will give maybe more pineapple if they're sort of towards the 18, or more of sort of whiter grapefruit or grassiness or cat pea or gooseberry if they're 14. And then there's also whether whether the yeasts are given enough nitrogen or the amount of nitrogen they're given. So it depends.
Can I break in on that one? Because many of these techniques are very high energy dependent, particularly with refrigeration. We've just had in France yesterday the hottest ever day on record overall. Energy and sustainability are going to be massive, massive issues over the next few years. Can the industry afford to keep on making wine in that kind of style?
No. So back in 2018, I was at a conference about making rosé, and there was an Italian winemaker or researcher from one of the universities, I can't remember her name offhand, who had done a lot of research and said, really, they didn't need to make wine under 18 degrees centigrade in the tank. It really, it's too much use of electricity, but we will still get a lot of rosés coming in that say they're 12 or 13 degrees cold fermentation. And I get quite belligerent about that now. I kind of say, what are you trying to do, really?
I would turn that around. I think we talk a lot about the production side and refrigeration, and the key is also cold stabulation, which is even worse than fermenting temperatures for energy efficiency. But the classic figure that's bandied around, this is rosé specifically, is packaging and clear glass, because the vast majority of rosé is packaged in clear glass, which cannot be made from recycled glass. And especially in Provence, they like to use their fancy, extra sculpted square bottles or rounded bottles, there's one that has crickets sort of embossed on it. They like their fancy bottles, and these tend to use up more glass, less recycled glass, and be heavier to transport, or with their strange shapes, you can fit fewer of them on a pallet. And there's a lot of producers who I think have a lot of merit to their argument, who say that 2/3 of the carbon footprint of their wines comes just from the bottles and the shipping of the wine, and that from their perspective, they would rather use all the electricity or all the diesel or whatever in the field, whatever it costs, and they can mitigate all of that by just using slightly lighter bottles to bottle the wine, or by shipping slightly smarter, or by bottling in Britain rather than bottling at the estate, or by using dark glass. The flip side of that is customers don't like rosé in dark glass so much in a retail environment. Nothing else is and lights. I mean, we've spoken about this many times before. But I think it was Patrick Schmidt who made the interesting point that we talk about sustainability and the environmental sustainability. We don't talk so much about social sustainability and financial sustainability. Can we afford to continue making these expensive or carbon expensive wines? Maybe, maybe not. But there's also the question to be made that can producers afford to make affordable or inexpensive wines in an environment where we talk a lot about the financial struggles of the industry. And it's easy to say, well, they should be bottling in dark glass, light strike, blah, blah, blah. But I think it was Mateusz in particular, when Mateusz switched from dark glass to clear glass, I think it was the 70s, sales went up by 30% in the first year alone. It really, really, really made a huge difference. So from a producer's point of view, it's easy to give an actual carbon cost of this clear glass, but there's also very, very clear financial benefit from that clear glass that maybe we don't talk about enough. And if we think about the financial benefit, would we rather have clear glass and then increased sales, which provides more cash to the winemaker to invest in organic or regenerative viticulture, or to care less about higher yields, or all sorts, or be more involved in the community? So I think that the whole sustainability model is important, but it's very, very much multifaceted. And I think rosé is at the crux of this, because rosé has both this very turned on younger consumers who are interested in the sustainable side, but also a particularly bad winemaking practice, or particularly bad packaging, particularly bad winemaking, where somehow the wine that appeals to the most sustainable sensitive is the least sustainable, and there's no right or wrong answer there.
Thank you. On the winemaking and quality question, do you think, against the trend to produce a lot of wine that tastes pretty similar, that there will be an increase over the next few years of wines, rosé wines, particularly from Provence, that show more of a regional character?
I think that depends on who you're talking to, and we've been saying this for years and years, is that there isn't just one rosé market. It's like talking about top Bordeaux and gluggable jug wine from somewhere else. I think the entry-level stuff will continue in a fairly anonymous level at a certain price point. I think last year we would have said there would continue to be an increase in premium rosé. I think this year we felt, submitted for the Provence report, there were fewer premium wines than usual. Whether that's because they didn't want to submit them because they hate us, or I don't know, or they're not making so many. So there have been a couple of vineyards who we loved their wine 2-3 years ago. Fantastic wine, dark glass. They were doing everything right as far as we were concerned. Spontaneous fermentation, warmer temperature fermentation, everything right. And the following year, last year, I went back to them, or Ben went back to them, and we said, can we taste the next vintage? Oh no, we've stopped making that because we couldn't sell it. And you're going to think, but we've shown this wine to people and everyone loved it. So have you thought of maybe training your sales staff? But there's an awful lot of people who've just stopped making high quality premium rosé because it's harder to sell. And that, for me, is absolutely tragic because it's a backward step.
And that's quite a fundamental change since the rosés of southern France came about, isn't it? Because that's one of the points about the growth of those kinds of wines. The other thing that I think is utterly fascinating about that book is your section at the end on aged rosé, which when I first read it, I was blown away by. I mean, I had never considered many rosés Tavel apart, perhaps, to be so capable of aging in such an interesting way. Quite a number of us here tonight, and others who will watch this later on YouTube, are involved in wine education. Is it time that those of us involved in wine education help people to understand rosé in a very different way?
Ben?
I think that wine education for rosé is perhaps torn between what is generally true and the niche. And we talk about ageable rosé, or actually myths in general. And I think there's a lot of myths that need to be dispelled about rosé, but perhaps only at a certain level, where if we go around telling the message that we will have, or that we ought to have for standard supermarket consumers, is absolutely not the same sort of thing we should be saying to prosumers or people who have a lot of experience. I think rosé does age, and we should be telling people about it. But there's a very big difference between rosé bought at the supermarket will be fine in 3 years' time, which I think we do very much believe. If anything, it would be better after a year or two. But that's not at all the same thing as saying ultra premium rosé from Tavel or Provence or Rioja or the Douro or Greece. Ultra premium wines made in the same way as ultra premium reds and whites, they will also be aging, and they'll get better and better in 5, 10, 20, 30 years even, maybe. And so I suppose that as Liz said earlier, there is no one rosé category, and we can't talk about rosé ages, rosé doesn't age, without saying there's rosé that can sort of be left at the back of a cupboard without getting worse, and that's not at all the same as rosé that you'll want to age for years and years and years.
So last October with Dominic, with Libération Tardive, we did a vertical on rosé. We planned to go back to 86, but FedEx dropped the box. So we went back to 1996 rosé. And this year it will be November the 16th, which will be the Fine Rosé Day in London, where there will be older vintages. Everyone who's exhibiting has to be able to present some older vintages, and a debate on fine rosés made in the vineyard, not in the cellar. So that will be interesting, just to carry on this discussion in a much more in-depth way. But I think what was interesting, Ben, you were talking about, we're hoping the online rosé report about the tastings of Provence wine will go online tomorrow. And we were just going through the top wines, and we were expecting out of Provence the reds and the whites to be the most successful. But in the end, even everything taken into account, it was the premium rosés that were sweeping across the board with the highest scores. So although maybe we think there are fewer premium rosés, maybe it's not that there are fewer at the top, but there are more coming up from the bottom. Maybe. What do you think, Ben?
I think it's a cultural problem maybe in Provence, where because it's both a very, very old historic region, but it's also an extremely new up and coming upstart of a wine region, where they may have been milking wines for a very long time, but that culture has been almost entirely forgotten and reinvented in the last 20 years. And I think a large part of that is, why do we make a wine? Why does anyone make a wine? Why does any winemaker make a wine? And which wines do they want to make, and why are they making, and what do they expect to have to put into that wine, and what do they expect to take out of it? And I think you wouldn't go to Burgundy and speak to a winemaker who makes 1,000 bottles of Grand Cru, but 100,000 bottles of village level or regional level. And they might say, well, actually, our Grand Cru was 20 times the price of the regional Burgundy, and so we weren't selling quite as much of it, so we stopped making it. That would sound absolutely bonkers. And yet that's what's happening in Provence, where I think there's this culture that has developed in the last 20 years. Most of the wines that are made in Provence today, most of the rosés, and something that I think really differentiates Provence rosé from other categories, it's a consumer-driven category, not a producer-driven category. These aren't winemakers who woke up in the morning and said, I want to make rosé. They're making rosé because people are buying that rosé, even if the producers themselves don't believe in it. If you ask most Provençal old winemakers, what wine do you like?
Old.
Say the red. Old. No, but I mean,
my age.
Not. Yes.
Can I interrupt a bit? And one of the fascinating things you say in the Provence book, and we'll move on to that more now, I think, is the extraordinary diversity of Provence. And I think those of us who don't know the area very well are really, when we read this book, we're just amazed about the diversity that there is. You were saying some very interesting things, though, before everybody came on the call, about the nature of the culture of wine production in Provence. Ben, could you say a little bit more about that? And I found that extraordinary.
I think the main thing is who is in Provence, and it used to be, when Liz started off working in Provence, that it was old local families with a few fields and chickens running around making wine. It could be out of an old film, and it was all rustic reds. And there's been a huge influx, and then before the modern Provence world, there was a huge influx of aristocratic money, where we're talking about the Trevelans and the Vignelots and Count.
I want to come back to Trevelin in a minute.
Well, happily. There's a huge base of sort of influx of aristocratic money coming into Provence, second homeowners that bought a chateau with some vines. And that had a very specific culture. And then modern culture is rosé driven. It's very internationally minded. why are these people making rosé? Who brought them to make rosé? And there's both a love of modern Provence rosé because it brings in a lot of money, it sells reasonably well, but there's also a certain disdain for it because it is seen as even in Provence, if anything, more so in Provence than in some other regions, it is still seen as a cash cow, and it is still seen as a slightly lesser wine that some of the producers themselves, especially an older generation or more established generation, don't necessarily believe in.
Well, actually, it reminds me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. No, for the 40th anniversary, I was on a panel of speakers celebrating the Côte de Provence. And I was between Monsieur Farnet of Chateau Minuti and Sacha Lachine and me. And it's kind of like, okay, this is being led to the slaughter somewhat. But both Farnet and Lachine were absolutely adamant that the only way you can make good rosé is if it's as pale as pale as pale. And I fought back, and I got a sort of feeble round of applause from the rebels on the back row. But as Ben said, they were making the product that the consumer wanted, and for them that was pale. There was no discussion of, well, actually, if it's paler, we're making a better wine. It has to be pale. And my argument was, and still is, forget the colour. You have to say whether or not you like the wine. That should come first. Sorry, Ben. Helen, you were asking.
No, I was just wanting to also not forget the bits that you were telling me earlier, which I thought were extraordinary, about what people in Provence, winemakers in Provence, actually understand the purpose of an estate to be, which is quite distinct from even other parts of southern France.
Absolutely. I think Provence, a lot of Provence Provence started off, and this is before my time, before even Liz's time, started off as big bulk producers like the Languedoc. There's a vast amount of the Carignan, Aramon. We're talking a long time ago was just generic Southern French Uni Blanc. And then there was a wave of big improvements with the Uni Blanc turning as Uni Blanc, and then Sauvignon Blanc turning up, and Cabernet Sauvignon turning up. And Cabernet especially came with this idea that Provence could emulate the Bordeaux model. And we have the 1955 classification, which utterly imitating Bordeaux. And we have a lot of producers making the estate red, the estate white, maybe the estate rosé, and maybe they make a second wine. And then we also have people thinking that actually it won't go down the Bordeaux model, it will go down the Burgundian model. And one of the largest investors in Provence in the 80s was Louis Latour, planted hundreds of hectares of Pinot Noir in Provence, thinking that was the future, and that didn't work out. But so we have this image in Provence of Bordeaux bottles and a lot of Cabernet going into the red, and I wouldn't. Not quite in a super Tuscan way, but they saw themselves as Bordelais when Bordeaux was up and coming.
Can I just interrupt? So we were talking earlier about, so Andrea said we must have travelled miles and miles and miles to visit all these vineyards. And I said, well, because we've been working in the area for 40 years, it wasn't a new thing, it was going. And Ben was saying that actually visiting some of these vineyards and talking, like we went to Louis Latour's vineyards, which was fairly eye-opening. Are you allowed to say why it was eye-opening, Ben?
Let's. I think Pinot Noir doesn't really belong in Provence on the whole, and also it was a relic of the past where Provence was still making inexpensive bulk wine from inexpensive bulk production facilities.
That's very polite. We'll leave it at that.
Let's move on to something else you said earlier, which is you dropped the name Treveillon, and in the new book you make some big claims about Treveillon, that it's which is an extraordinary estate. I remember trying to go and visit there soon after Robert Parker wrote his book on the wines of the Rhone and the Provence, and actually being told where to go, which was a bit of a disappointment. But it's a wonderful wine. I've had the privilege of tasting it. You say that it's a wine that is absolutely world class. Can you see Provence producing other world-class wines over the next few years? And what are they going to be like, and where are they going to come from?
I think with Trevelyan, one thing is they've just never changed what they've done. They had a very clear vision of how to make the wine. And I know over the years when I visited them and we've talked about, do you have a tapis roulant, the table where you sort the grapes when it comes into the cellar. And Ostian Durbach said, no, why would we have that? Or we look after our grapes in the field. We know all the grapes. There's no bringing in manky grapes. The quality is already there. And I said, how do you blend? She goes, blend? We ferment it all. We put it in barrels, and we don't sort of sort it. It just all goes together. Which has a very straightforward and honest approach. And I'm not sure I know of anyone else making red or white wine in quite such an intensive quality way. Do we? Who else do we know?
I think if so one thing I'd say is that maybe that's still part of that Bordelais approach of there is one estate blend. Ostian would never ever in a million years have a single parcel that's her Grand Cru Burgundian style. That would never ever happen. I was surprised the very first time I visited. I've always perceived Trevelyan to be not necessarily so snobbishly better than the rest of Provence, but that they do stand out. And I was quite surprised when speaking to Ostian that she didn't see that from her perspective. She saw herself as part of a wider Provençal landscape, even if things are very different. But I think that maybe that gap is getting wider rather than narrower. But that doesn't mean it has to exist. We see them as, there's a lot of Cabernet in Trevelyan, so that's a bit exotic. But there is a lot of Cabernet elsewhere in Provence, and I think maybe the difference is not so much in the wines as the philosophy, as Liz was saying with the blending, the idea that are there many estates that really have one singular iconic wine without the temptation to muddle around with a second wine or this cuvee or that barrel.
But we did discuss one of the things that came up quite frequently when we were writing the book is that we knew a lot of estates, but only from really their entry-level rosé, which we were quite close to dismissing quite a few estates that we didn't want them in the book. And then they'd say, we would say to them, you can send your red, your white, your Vin de France, your orange wine, anything you want to send, we will look at it. And we came across minute quantities because the bulk of their income was from very ordinary rosé. And we discovered there are actually far more top quality red and white wines than we realized. And although they're not crowding out the top level on our recent tastings, they were excellent quality wines. But they can't sell it. They sell it locally. Nobody in England. We had a dinner when we did our book launch, which was largely red and white wines, and everyone loved the wines, and all the importers who came to the dinner said, can't sell Provence red and white. People only want the bulk rosé. So there is this dual personality. We're very, very critical that producers are making the rosé that the consumer in the supermarket wants. And at the same time, we're blocking them making very good wine. And I think that is, it must be quite painful for producers to know that they're making good wine that just nobody wants.
Why does nobody want it? If it is so good.
Is pricing in due to input cost in the case?
I think marketing budgets for rosé, and this is going to sound incredibly controversial. Marketing budgets for rosé, good rosé, are generally less than for equivalent reds and whites, and I think that's true in Provence and elsewhere. I think that if we take sort of overall budget for promoting or sort of for raising awareness of quality in the wines, most estates in Provence and outside of Provence, despite what we think, spend less on promoting the rosé than they do on the reds and the whites. And perhaps don't quote me on this, but it's worth speaking to some trade bodies. I know Interrone, for example, publish the marketing budget for their year, and they do break it down based on how much they're expecting to spend per bottle of rosé and per bottle of white and per bottle of red to promote the wines. And they spend, I think it was about, and again, I'm not sure if it's public, but I believe they spend about twice as much on promoting a typical bottle of white than a typical bottle of rosé. It's just how we envisage that. So we might think of, say, a big vertical tasting of reds is very expensive to put on, and we tend not to do that sort of thing for the rosé. We might spend the money elsewhere on the rosé, but it's rare for a producer to keep back libraries or old vintages of ageable rosé. But that is very expensive, and I think that pulls it down. So I think
Can I come back to, thank you so much. Can I come back though to Trevion? And one of the other things you said in the book, which I think is absolutely fascinating, you hinted on it in what you were talking about before, that the Cabernet becoming more dominant in Trevion. And one of the reasons that the Cabernet, you say, is becoming more dominant is that it is actually getting more difficult in the climate we have today to grow Syrah successfully. And
I'm not sure Cabernet is getting more dominant. I think it's dominant in that region, but didn't Ostian say there was going to be more Sanso for freshness coming?
Yeah, you said that as well. My question, though, was that if Syrah is becoming more difficult and other grape varieties are struggling with climate change, do you see the grape varieties being chosen for making red wine, particularly in Provence, changing over the next few years? Will we see Mourvèdre? Will we see something quite different?
So this is a big bugbear. There's a lot of Mourvèdre. When I started 40 years ago, you only got Mourvèdre in Bandol, and it is spreading. And I find this stupid. I may be wrong, but it's something that irritates me amazingly when I see producers going, you know what, Sangiovese does quite well in Tuscany. Let's plant Sangiovese in Provence. And you're going to go, okay, that's going to change your wine quite a bit. Or we're going to put Moscow-Filero in our rosé because we're harvesting it earlier to keep the acidity. And if we put a Muscati grape in, we can bulk up the fruitiness. Or Acertico, no, was it Acertico they're putting in? There's some vineyards have Negramaro, and you can think, what are you doing? You know, how many producers do we talk to who, there are a few, I think we could probably do it on, two hands, who are saying we are going to change the canopy management or the ground cover and actually look at what we've got and try working with that. I mean, there are people like Jean-Francois Ott, who is passionate about his floppy vines, to protect them, to shade them. And then you go to the next door neighbour producer who's like, well, that looks a mess. I'm going to take all the leaves off because that looks neat and tidy. And the grapes get burnt. So, and then we're going to plant other grape varieties. So, yes, I do think there is a lot of sloppy, gimmicky innovation as far as how to react to climate change. How many people go to north-facing higher slopes? Provence is hilly. How many people are looking at those? Ben, do you agree on that? Have I just launched in on that?
I do agree. I think I would be a little bit more cynical. I'm not sure if we seem to be playing good cop, bad cop on this call, but I'd be a little bit more cynical. I'd say that a lot of the grapes chosen for the reds, and this is the reason that Cabernet is going up, I think the proportion of Cabernet in the red is going up by quite a bit. Not necessarily because people are planting Cabernet, and they're not, but because the proportion of red is dropping so rapidly that the Grenache is being shunted off to the rosé, the Sanso is being shunted off to the rosé, what little Carignan is left is being shunted off towards the rosé, which means the only grapes that are left is the Cabernet and the Syrah. And I think there's an awful lot of Cabernet and Syrah older vines that is mostly being made into a red, because that's just the last holdout before it goes into the rosé. And when we talk about Provence as a whole, and actually this is a question we haven't discussed, what is Provence, and that's where do we draw the line as to what's Provence, what isn't Provence? We could talk about that for about 2 hours, but on a sort of Provence global level, red is anywhere between 3 and maybe, if we stretch it, maybe 10%. I mean, so we're really talking about minute quantities. Most producers might make a red, but there's one producer we were talking to in Coteau Varois. They have 120 hectares. They're not small, and they make 2,000 bottles of red. I mean, that's less than 0.5% of their production is red. That's all they can sell. So when we talk about Provence reds, we talk about great wines or really exciting wines, or a producer like Trevelin. But Trevelin is it 35,000 bottles a year, 40,000 bottles a year, for a region that makes 150 million a year. Trevelin is utterly irrelevant. It may be famous, but there's 3 times as much Garros made as Trevelin. And
I do feel that actually comes back to when we were writing the book. We did feel it was a fairly schizophrenic region, that there is a limit to, if 75% of production is bulk rosé. Obviously, we didn't spend a lot of time in the book talking about fairly uniform wines. And for us, what we really enjoyed was discovering the equivalents of Trevelin in some of the other regions. And so maybe the book gives a slightly distorted impression about what is in Provence. We've written more about the people that actually excited us and less about the bulk rosé side of it. And I'm not sure what other regions have that dual personality. I know Natasha just, with her Beaujolais book, a lot of the very big producers were unhappy that she concentrated on so many little producers, and maybe that's fairly similar. But I think if the only thing we get from writing this book is that we inspire people to actually search out the exciting wines that aren't necessarily being exported, how you're going to taste them and how you're going to find them is another problem, but there is a lot there.
We could sorry, Ben, please go on.
I was going to say, just to summarize in maybe 1 or 2 sentences, you asked, will the top reds of Provence in 10 years be made from Mourvèdre or Syrah? I think the top reds of Provence in 10 years will probably be made from Cinsault and Carignan and Mourvèdre. But there won't be more than 10 or 20,000 bottles in the whole region made of them. So yes, but also a footnote.
Thank you so much for that. That clarifies that beautifully. Though you do conclude the book by saying that Provence is more than rosé. The temptation is to talk principally about rosé, and that the region is far more diverse than you expected. What we haven't talked about so far is white wine, except in saying that the Rhone people have pushed their white wine a little bit more in their marketing budgets. What about Provençal white wine? Is there a future for white wine here, using some of the insights that they may have gained from making high quality rosé?
Fabulous.
That is the worst. For me, that is the worst. So when we first started tasting lots of Provence white wines, we were going, the word, Ben is the tasting organizer. He bags everything up and puts it to one side. And so I don't really know what's going to be in the lineup. And we had a lineup of rosés, and we got to one wine, and I said, "Are you sure this is a rosé? It looks very much like a white wine, tastes like a white wine, could be a white wine." And it was a rosé. And the same, we had rosés that crept into the white wine tasting. And why I think that's quite important is if you cannot tell the difference between the rosé and the white wine, they are making the white wines in exactly the same way that we talked about the bulk rosé earlier. They're using yeasts that create that fruitiness. They're using very cold fermentation. And basically what they've all done is our rosés are almost white. Sometimes they're making pale rosé, sometimes they're making blanc de noir, sometimes they're making white wine, and that's a whole generic. But the good white wines are fabulous. There are some people in Lalande along the coast, people who add in a bit more Semillon, bit of Claret. We both love Claret. People winemakers who are embracing the very ripe fruit and allowing that expression of ripeness. We did a tasting between Tuscan, was it 2 years ago, Elisabetta? We did a tasting of Tuscan Vermentino and Provence roll. And the Tuscans were saying, you know what, we're going to embrace that richness. We're going to put it in oak for a year. We're going to really allow it to develop. And Provence hasn't yet quite got that confidence, with more producers doing that amazing style of white. So for me, yes, I think there is a future for making good white wine in Provence, if they can move away from making white imitation bulk rosé. Well, I don't know. I mean, we've liked Bandol white, we've liked Luberon white, and then one of the big discoveries in the book, we were going through all the information in Coteau d'Aix, and there's a valley called the Treverès Valley. And I said to Ben, you know, every single white wine in this valley has a high percentage of Sauvignon Blanc, ending with Vignelor at the top of the valley. Isn't that weird? No one's mentioned this. So I called up the director of Coteau d'Aix and I said, I'd like to discuss the presence of Sauvignon Blanc in this valley where the director's estate is. Can Ben and I come over and visit the vineyards along this valley to discuss the presence of Sauvignon Blanc? And his response was, we're grubbing that up. We want to focus on rosé. So I ignored what he said, because now, even in a blind tasting, we can spot a white wine from the Treverès Valley because of that Sauvignon Blanc character. And I think that is such a strength that they need to embrace. And I'm hoping, I don't think it will happen, but I'm hoping a lot of producers will read this book and see how we've highlighted some of the strengths that they could be focusing on. I mean, that's what we've tried to do. No?
Is there a version going to be in French as well?
Hopefully.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, good. Good. Sorry, I interrupted. Ben, did you want to comment further?
It was just to build a little bit on what Liz was saying. I think that there's that dichotomy, as Patricia said in the comments, that there's that huge dichotomy between Provence as a relatively small, undeveloped red and white and serious rosé appellation, Provence red and white, and that includes the Sauvignon Blancs. But that still is less than 10% of the overall appellation, or the overall region, not appellation. And I think to hammer home what Liz is saying about Provence rosé and white, I think there's two parts. One is a cultural producer focus. Why are they making the wines that they're making? I think a lot of the whites exist because they have a customer base that doesn't like rosé for whatever cultural reason, but they like the wine, they just don't like the fact it's pink. And so by making a roll that is effectively a cheap and cheerful poolside rosé that just isn't pink, they're still selling all of the wine. And when they talk, every producer in Provence says the whites, we sell out of the whites every year, but they're selling out of tiny volumes of inexpensive wine. And the second thing is, maybe more so than the rosé, we talk about rosé, what is a good rosé? Can rosé age? Producers in Provence would ask exactly the same questions about a white. For a lot of producers in Provence, a white wine is as unoaked as a rosé. A white wine is about freshness and minerality and elegance, and it should be straightforward and almost severe, where you want it to be incredibly saline to go with seafood. And that's very much, especially in Bandol. And Liz talked about Claret. We love Claret. It's an extremely Provençal variety. They have Claret in Bandol and they have Claret in Gigondas. And Gigondas recently started adding Claret, added white to the appellation, and I think it's a minimum of 70% Claret. And almost everyone in Gigondas harvests it at 14%, and it's ripe, it's structural, there's tropical fruit, it's incredibly exciting wine. And in Bandol, they harvest at 12.5%, and they want to lower the amount of Claret the appellation requires of them from, I think, currently 70% to 50, because they want a wine that is as neutral, a white wine that is as neutral as possible. Because not because they're making bad wine, but because for them that is what a white ought to be.
That's what it means to them. We don't have an awful lot of time left. I mean, I wish we had 2 or 3 hours, but you were very keen, I know, beforehand, and I am especially keen to hear about the Provence report, which is an adjunct, a very important adjunct to the book itself, which is coming out soon. Would you like to tell us a little bit more, please?
So, I mean, I think we've sort of focused quite a bit on some of our negativity about where Provence should be going and is not going. And I think, as I say, it's a dual nature of the area. And we Academy de Vin do not put really tasting notes in the book because it dates the book. But we felt we were tasting some amazing Provence wines while doing our research. So hoping tomorrow, as long as Ben doesn't get stuck on trains and planes tomorrow, by the end of the week, we'll be publishing online on our website, pink.wine, a review of nearly 500 Provence wines: red, white, pink, orange, sparkling. Any sparkling? No, we didn't have any sparkling.
There are 3 sparklings in the report.
With our...
Can I actually interrupt about sparkling? Provence is desperate to sell more sparkling. Côte de Provence, the syndicat for the AOP, invests vast amounts of money in researching sparkling because they see it as a commercial future. Because I think there's a lot of overlap between people who buy Prosecco and people who buy Côte de Provence Rosé. But almost invariably, Provence sparkling is disgusting. I don't know where they're going. There's the whole méthode provençale, which is a bit of a silly thing to be going down, but they try really, really hard, and it's never any good. And I think
it doesn't work.
It doesn't. But I mean, it could be that's because they haven't spent there's only a few companies in Provence actually make it. They all make the juice and get it sent off to be made into sparkling rather than doing it themselves, which I think is it means that we're only actually comparing 2 or 3 producers. They haven't learned from Cava. There's a lot of great Grenache rosé, sparkling rosé made elsewhere. They ought to be able to make it in Provence. But so far it hasn't happened.
The producers need to read our book, that's for sure. But anyway, the Provence tasting report will hopefully we will be able to keep that up as an annual report, which will track some of the development. But there are some fantastic Provence wines listed on that. See how it goes. I think we've included quite a few Vin de France single variety old grapes. So Patricia, I think Picpoul stops at the Rhône. I really don't know anyone in Provence that has Picpoul. The Rhône is a big divide on grapes.
You haven't mentioned
there are plenty
wine.
of other old grape varieties that are included in the book. So
yeah,
there's a few orange wines in Provence, anywhere between half a dozen and a dozen.
And natural wine.
Yes.
There are natural wines. Maybe fewer than elsewhere, and I think perhaps again it comes back to culture. A lot of people in Provence and elsewhere would ask, can rosé be a natural wine? I'm not going to answer that, but I think it's a question that is asked and to which the natural producers in Provence all take a different approach, and it's a conversation for another day. But
we do have
wine in Provence.
A section where we list the orange wine, the natural wine. I'm a big natural wine fan, not dirty natural, but sort of non-industrial wine. And so I try to include as many producers with 2 hectares making completely interesting natural wine, because I really strongly believe that that will increase the amount of personality in the region.
Thank you. Finally, what is Provence?
Can I not answer that? Can I ask everybody else in the call to at least give me or give us some ideas of that? Because we know what we think Provence is. Some of the time, in fact, even we don't. But I think everyone has their own opinion of Provence. I think while people are typing in the chat as to what they think Provence is, I'm going to quickly tell an anecdote. I think Liz might tell it better, but we were visiting this producer in Provence, big producer. Everyone here will have known it, will have tried their wines at least once. And we asked her, "What do you think Provence is?" And she said, "Côte de Provence." I said, "Okay, interesting answer. What about Coteaux d'Aix and Coteaux Var?" Right, oh yeah, and you go, right, definitely them. So then we said, "What about Libaud? Libaud de Provence is the full name of the appellation." Said, well, maybe Provence, maybe not. Which is interesting because, of course, Libaud was a subset of Coteaux d'Aix. And then we said, "Well, what about Bandol?" And she said, "Didn't know they made any wine there." Which I think says mountains about the education of producers in Provence. But I think also questions, what is Provence? Bandol would often describe themselves as, would typically say they're Provence, but they would also say that their wines are so different to the rest of the appellation as to be considered separate. Is that true? Is that growing, or is the gap growing? There's more and more veg elsewhere, so maybe it matters less. But also, there's more and more veg in Bandol, so again, maybe not. So I think looking at the comments, Luberon is absolutely a part of Provence, but they're not allowed to put Vin de Provence on the label. In fact, if a producer uses the word Provence on the label in Luberon, they will be sued, whatever.
Talking of which should be actually only within these four walls.
It is recorded.
It is recorded. Maybe I won't say it then, because it's after you stop recording, I will tell you that snippet of information. Because it really is.
We spoke to one producer recently who made a rosé that we quite liked in Provence, in unquestionably heartland of Provence, and they said they were struggling to sell their wine because their wine wasn't Provence style. And there's this, which is strange, because they're in Provence and they're a known producer. Are we at the point where the style is defining the region rather than the region defining the style? You wouldn't, if someone in Champagne made a slightly different Champagne, you wouldn't tell them, "Oh, it's not very Champenois that." You'd say, well, that they're defining their local region, or it's a producer's personal style. And I think Provence is maybe defined by rosé, it's maybe defined by the style of rosé, very, very pale. But why should it be pale when Provence rosé historically is maybe darker than the Camargue, where it's Grenache Gris primarily, and Vin Gris and Sable de Camargue, which is southern French and is unquestionably paler than Provence, unless we consider the Camargue to be.
Time has gone. Liz, before we come off air, just to so you can make your wonderfully confidential point to us, is there any final comment you'd like to make?
I think I would just like to sort of say we did the Rhône Découverte press trip a couple of years ago, and we started in the north, and Ben was happily tasting Condrieu, Côte Rôtie, the works, and we got to just south of Montélimar, and Ben went, "Oh, thank God I'm home again." He is a Provençal lad through and through, even though he sounds very, very English. And despite all of our criticisms and frustrations, I think it's a region that I absolutely adore and I love the potential, and it really does have a joie de vivre that lots of wine regions don't have. And I think they need to remember that, and they need to embrace that with a bit more expansive love sometimes, and not be too.
It's a region.
Anyway, I just think it's a great area, and I just hope. I think everyone else who's been loves it too.
Thank you. That joie de vivre, that love has come over wonderfully in the last hour, and we are deeply grateful to you both.